Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 6th of February of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. The negotiations between Ukraine and Russia are on the verge of complete collapse. According to information we have, first Deputy Chief of Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation, General Alexeyev, was attacked in Moscow. An unknown assailant fired several shots in the back of the Lieutenant General on Volokhamsk highway and fled the scene. Alexeyev was hospitalized. The Kremlin have already made several statements on this matter. The Kremlin commented on the assassination attempt on Lieutenant General Alexeyev. The intelligence service are doing their job and everything is reported to the head of the state, Peskov said. The Kremlin wishes Lieutenant General Alexeyev a speedy recovery. Military leaders are under threat during war, and ensuring their safety is the responsibility of the intelligence services. Furthermore, we had a very interesting situation. The assassination attempt on Lieutenant General Vladimir Alexeyev, who holds the position of first Deputy Chief of the GRU of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, is puzzling. One of the key negotiators on Ukraine is in the hospital. It is known that this general was the one handling the most problematic issues. So this person was a part of the Russian delegation in Abu Dhabi, and he was responsible for many questions, and he was a part of the negotiation process. Furthermore, we had a report that yesterday, after meeting with the new head of the SBU, Zelensky announced his approval of new attacks and operations against Russia. So as of the end of the 6th of February of 2026, we still haven't received reports whether the Ukrainians are responsible for this attack or not, but the Russians are trying to find this, and they're trying to bridge the gap between Ukraine, between Zelensky and this assassination attempt. So the situation is very complicated, and if the Russians are able to do this, then most likely the negotiations will fail. At the same time, the Ukrainians have made their own statements, the Ukrainian authorities, and they stated that they have nothing with this assassination attempt, and they're saying that there is a third party behind this assassination who is interested in ruining the negotiation process between Russia and Ukraine. So anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but the situation is critical. At the same time, we start receiving reports that the Russians have finished their preparations to attack Ukraine with missiles and drones this upcoming night. Lots of experts reported that most likely between the 6th and the 7th of February of 2026, the Russians will attack the Ukraine once again with the purpose most likely to destroy completely the energy infrastructure. So we have several reports on this matter. Strategic bombers continue to redeploy from the Far East to Engels airfield, equip themselves with cruise missiles, and subsequently redeploy to Alenia. Active preparations are underway for another massive missile strike. And here we can see satellite picture where we can see the differences in the aircrafts, medium quality satellite imagery of the Ukrainka air base. As of the 6th of February, the following aircraft were present at the air base: 34 Tu-25 aircrafts, 5 Tu-161, Il-78 and 1 Il-20. Relocation of 3 Tu-95 aircrafts from the Ukrainka air base to Engels 2 air base has been carried out, supportedly by 2 Il-78M tanker aircraft. Additional relocation of 1 Tu-160 aircraft from the Ukrainka airbase likely to Engels 2 has been conducted. So all relocations presumably being carried out for the purpose of arming with Ha-101 type cruise missiles. This article and all these things, all these statements and analysis of different experts are telling us that most likely this upcoming night the Ukraine would be attacked once again. As for the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked the Ukraine on the morning of the 6th of February of 2026, and the Russians were attacking the settlement of Krapivnitsky. During the day we were receiving lots of updates of how the Russians were raising their MiG-31 aircrafts vessels with hypersonic missiles, and later we received reports that the Russians began launching hypersonic missiles in the southwestern direction. Later we received reports about explosions on the territory of the city of Krapivninsky. So this is the map where we can see the approximate roads of Russian attacks between the 5th and the 6th of February of 2026, and later the Minister of Defense of Ukraine reported that between the 6 p.m. of the 5th of February of 2026 and 12 a.m. of the 6th of February of 2026, the Russians used 335 air vehicles to attack the territory of Ukraine. As you can see, the Russians used a lot of air vehicles, but the most important thing that we haven't received almost anything about this attack, and the Ukrainians, according to this article, managed to bring down 297 targets. So most likely the Russians were conducting reconnaissance operation. They were collecting and gathering intelligence information with the purpose to attack this upcoming night. So based on all these things and based on the reports that we have received since the announcement of since the announcement of the great disconnect from the Starlink system, we see that there are several types of Russian forces who continue working without problems and without issues. First of all, we're talking about aircrafts and we're talking about missile forces. As for the situation on the ground, we continue receiving reports that the Russians were forced to slow down their offensive operations. Now let's discuss everything in details, and first let's talk about the northern directions. During the previous 24 hours, pro-Russian sources published a very interesting video from the area of the settlement of Voronezh. In this video, we can see how Russians were attacking a 110 kV substation in the northeastern parts of Ukraine. As a result of attacks, the substation was almost completely destroyed. We're talking about this territory. If we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of this month, we will see that during the previous 6 days, lots of explosions and lots of attacks took place in this area. The most important one is attack in the area of the city of Konotop. As a result of that attack, a railway station was destroyed. Later, we received this video where we can see exactly the moments when the Russians were attacking a railway station. So as we understand, the Ukrainians were trying to redeploy additional forces in the direction or in the northern direction, and the Russians were trying to do everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to bring additional forces. This video took place on the 4th of February, and here we can see a launching site of drones. The Ukrainians were planning to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation in the morning of the 4th of February, but the Russians discovered this launching site and the Russians attacked this territory, and Ukraine's plans failed. A bit later, we received another video from the settlement of Chervona. Here we can see how Russians were bombing positions of the armored forces of Ukraine along the border. So it seems that Ukrainians are concentrating their forces here. It seems that Ukrainians are preparing themselves to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, and these Ukrainian strikes can take place also in coming days. In the area of the city of Sumy, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and during the previous day we received lots of important updates from the southeast of the city of Sumy. The Russians, according to different reports, improved their positions significantly. This is the situation by the end of the 5th of February, and this is the situation by the end of the 6th of February. The Russians, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, established complete control over the settlement of Popovka. Furthermore, several pro-Russian sources confirmed that the village of Pokrovka is also about to be captured by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. I would like to remind you that just on the 2nd of February, pro-Ukrainian sources colored this territory as a gray zone, so most likely the Russians began their offensive operation several days ago, and by the end of the 6th of February, the Russians finished the battle for this territory. So the Russians are improving their positions, and the Russian offensive operation is gaining momentum. The Russians, as we can see, are trying to attack the settlement of Krasnopolye from several directions, from the northeast, from the east, from the southeast, and the Russians, it seems, are trying to outflank the settlement from the southwest. So the settlement of Krasnopolye is the primary and is a current task for the armed forces of the Russian Federation. At the same time, a bit further in the southwestern direction, we received a video how additional reinforcements and reserves arrived to the city of Trostianets. The Ukrainians most likely brought additional forces in this direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation, but when the Russians discovered this concentration of forces, they began bombing and attacking this territory. As a result of attack, we can see a very heavy explosion took place in this area, which means that most likely the arms were completely destroyed by the armed force of the Russian Federation. So the situation in this area is very complicated, and most likely in coming days we will receive more updates from this territory. At the same time, we received the report that the Ukrainians from their side are trying to concentrate additional forces in this area from 83rd Brigade, 3rd Brigade and 125th Brigade. The Russians are saying that these are well-experienced forces that can be used by Ukrainians to attack even the territory of the Russian Federation. And the Russians are saying that probably Ukrainians will try to cross the border between Russia and Ukraine, and the Ukrainians may try to attack in the Belgorod direction. This is the direction that Ukrainians have been attacking significantly since the beginning of this year with multiple launch rocket system. In this video we can see another attack that was carried out by Ukrainians between the 5th and the 6th of February. You know that all these things are very important because we see not just attempts from the Ukrainian side to do something, we see a pattern. If you remember, since the beginning of the special military operation, we've seen this pattern for several times. Something like mystical assassinations, sometimes some missile attacks from the Ukrainian side, redeployment of forces, and many other different things, and then another attempt to break through the Russia's defense. So the same things we used to see before in 2022 and in 2023 when Ukrainians were attacking the territory of the Russian Federation, mystical assassinations, then attacks on the Crimean Bridge. By the way, maybe the Ukrainians will try to attack the Crimean Bridge once again. Who knows what is going to happen within the next days, and the reports about the concentration of forces. So it seems that something is going to happen along the border between the Russian Federation and Ukraine in coming days, most likely after the Russians attack the energy infrastructure in Ukraine between the 6th and the 7th of February. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but everything is very complicated. As for the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region, the Russians continue their offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over the Russian side of the river of Volcha, over the northern part. During the previous 24 hours, lots of explosions and attacks took place. The Russians were bombing huge forests in this area with bombs, with aviation. Once again, the aviation of the armed force of the Russian Federation is almost the only unit, only type of forces that haven't suffered with the great disconnect of Starlink. We can't say the same thing about soldiers on the ground. So the sources indicate that Russian forces on the ground have huge problems, and some neutral observers reported that the Russians were forced to slow down their offensive. So we'll discuss this in a minute. So most likely in coming days the Russians will try to establish complete control over the northern bank of the river of Volcha, because Ukrainians may use this bridgehead to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. So that is why it is very important for the Russians to control this territory, not to allow the Ukrainians to counterattack. As for the Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything, just few videos of how Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine around the settlement of Pristin, which is located on the Ukrainian side of the river Voskol. As for the Barova direction, during the previous 24 hours, we received a report that the Russians were forced to slow down their offensive. This information was provided by neutral observers. After unregistered users were cut off from using the terminal, the Starlink terminal, Russian attack intensity suddenly and sharply dropped, at least in the Ternavata and Barova directions. So it seems that now the Russians are trying to find a solution how to replace the Starlink systems and so on, but it seems that it will take some time. But the problem is that this can take up to 6 months until the Russians find a solution how to establish strong communication and strong signals between forces along the line of combat contact and headquarters. As for the Slaviansk direction, the Ukrainians continue redeploying additional forces from one bank of the river of Seversky Donetsk to another with the purpose to stabilize the situation in the area of the city of Liman. And during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of videos of how Russians were attacking vehicles of the armed forces of Ukraine that were trying to cross the river. So the Russians have strong control over the main logistic lines without any chances for Ukrainians to redeploy their forces from one bank to another. But as you can see, without changes on the ground. As of the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything on the matter whether the Russians dropped their offensive operations significantly or not, so we are waiting for additional updates. But as of the end of the 6th of February, things and updates indicate that the Russians continue advancing mainly along MO3 road to the southeast of the city of Slaviansk. As for the city of Konstantinovka, the sources reported that Russian attacks generally slowed down. The biggest difference is noticeable with attacks coming from the Chasiv Yar side, but a slowing down is also noticed in the other parts of the direction. As for the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates, but most likely they are archived, and most likely, and all of them are just about one thing: how Russians were attacking positions, temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine, and how Russians were attacking the Ukraine's logistics without changes on the ground, as you can see. As for the Dobropolye direction, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the central part of the settlement of Grishna. Currently, there are very heavy clashes exactly for this territory, but also without changes. The same thing is about the Orekhov-Zaporozhye direction, but there is a small advance. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources published the video from the northeastern part of the settlement of Zaliznychne, and here we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the northeastern part of the settlement. And this video confirms that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through Ukraine's defense and to answer the settlement of Zaliznychne from the north. Now the Russians are trying to dig in deeper, and most likely in coming days the battle for Zaliznychne will be finished. Most likely the Russians will be able to break through Ukraine's defense, and then the Russians will continue advancing further in the western direction towards the city of Orekhov. But once again, everything depends on the communication, of course, and everything depends on whether the Starlink disconnect in this area affected the Russian offensive or not. Neutral reporters stated that this direction, the Tirnovati direction, is one of the directions where the Russian attack intensity suddenly and sharply dropped. As of now, we don't have additional proofs. Of course, we are waiting for additional updates, but obviously within the next 2 or 3 days, we will understand everything. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.